Welcome and greetings. I'm Patricia Kranz, the Executive Director of the Overseas Press Club. We are thrilled to present tonight's program to discuss Guillaume Bonn's new book, Paradise Inc., with Marc Lacey, an OPC governor who is managing editor of the New York Times. Introducing them is OPC Vice President Sandra Stevenson, a veteran photo editor and head of our programming committee. Sandra is managing editor for Education Week, overseeing visuals and immersive experiences. Previously, she was deputy director of photography at the Washington Post, and she has also worked at CNN and the New York Times. The panelists will talk for about a half an hour and then take questions. Please put your questions in the chat. I now turn it over to Sandra. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Patty, and thank you, Chad, who also helped organize this evening's book night. And most importantly, I have to thank Marc Lacey, who, as Patty pointed out, is New York Times managing editor and a fellow governor on the board. He is the one who brought this wonderful book to our attention and thought it would make an excellent conversation. So thank you, Marc, for doing that. And also thank you, Guillaume, for agreeing to participate. You are 7 hours ahead of us, and we really appreciate your willingness to stay up late and to discuss the work, not just the book, but your work in general, which I was introduced to as a picture editor at the New York Times. I won't keep us too long. I will go ahead and hand it over to Marc to continue the evening. Thank you both.
Sandra, thank you so much. And thank you, Patricia, for the introductions. And Guillaume, I guess the two of us should start with a little description of our history. We know each other. We've spent some time roaming together. What stands out? Tell the listeners a little bit how we know each other.
So we met in Nairobi. I hate to say it, but like maybe 20 years ago, and we started basically. And I think I came to see you the first time at your office, and I said, "Look, there's this story which I think is interesting." And and shortly thereafter, we were on a tiny plane that barely flew towards Turkana, which was a lake infested with huge crocodiles. And that was our first story together. And it was the beginning of many, for many years around the continent.
Yeah. I have a lot of fun memories. And so I'm really excited about this book. I know a lot of work went into it, and it's not just beautiful photos, and they are beautiful, but it's a really thought-provoking book. Before we get to it, I wanted the listeners to get a little more of a sense of you. And you are not someone who, like me, just arrived in Africa late in life and tried to figure it out. You were actually born there, and you have family history there. So talk a little bit about the Bonn family and Africa.
Okay, so it's a long story, so I'll try to make it short. But basically, my great-grandfather came to Madagascar as a colonial officer for France and married a Malagasy woman, which was at the time quite extraordinary to just use that term. And then my grandfather was born from that marriage, and then my father, and then myself. And then later on, I was just born in Madagascar. I didn't grow up like like my forebear, like my father and grandfather. But my father shortly after that started traveling around East Africa. So we went to the Comoros Island, Djibouti, North Yemen, and then eventually came to Kenya.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, so you know Africa, and you've spent a lot of time there. So the book is called Paradise Inc. And I wonder if you could just start with the title. What are you trying to get across for us with this title?
I guess it's my dark, dry English sense of humor. I wanted to juxtapose the fact that Africa is still part of the preconceived ideas that we've been fed with, which are the sort of postcards, beauty, and it's this incredible place, where you're surrounded by elephant, giraffes, and all those incredible animals. And then at the same time, because the book deals with conservation, I wanted to sort of amplify in passing that it's a business. And so that's why I juxtapose it. And I guess at the same time also I wanted to juxtapose the fact that it's the fragility of the beauty of Africa.
Well put. You start the book with a foreword written by a Maasai elder, and the Maasai elder wrote, "I lead a council of elders who advocate for peace between human and wildlife in my village." So his name is Ezekiel
Ole Katato.
Ole Katato. Tell me a little bit about him. How did he come to write the foreword to the book?
Yeah. I thought it was important to find a voice of somebody who actually lives on a day-to-day with wildlife around him, and what it means to be invaded in your village by wildlife, and how it is to still think that as a Maasai, because the tradition, goes back to living side by side with wildlife, how it is in the 21st century to still live that way. And so Ezekiel was introduced to me by a friend that we have in common, and we started basically talking for weeks, for months, and then we eventually realized that we were saying the same thing. So in a different way, and so I asked him if he would be interested in joining the book and writing this preface, because I thought it was important to have that voice.
That's great. And then you have a noted foreign correspondent who a lot of people who are tuning in will know, John Lee Anderson of the New Yorker. He wrote in the introduction that Paradise Inc. is a requiem and perhaps even an epitaph, but it is also a personal plea by Guillaume for the book's readers to shake off their illusions and to see things as they really are. And then he wrote, "Before it's too late." Is that a good description of what you're trying to do here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, basically, I did this book because it's kind of a quest and a reflection on trying to start a conversation about something that we all think is being taken care of, i.e., the preservation of wildlife and the landscape that where the wildlife lives. And so we all think that the usual suspects are basically taking care of it, and that is not the reality on the ground. In my lifetime, living in Kenya and growing up in Kenya and going to all those places that I've photographed for many years, I have seen with my own eyes all this beautiful landscape basically vanishing in front of my eyes and being replaced by by farms, by little villages, by unmonitored human dwellings, and I was asking myself, why is nobody talking about this? Why am I still seeing stories or books that are simplifying the issue of Africa and keeping it in that box of the postcard of Africa, where you basically only show the beauty without factoring what's happening around those postcards, so to speak, right? If you're looking at a national park, and so I wanted to expand the vision and look at it from a macro way rather than fueling the ideas that we have of Africa.
So we're going to be showing some of your photos as you're talking, but give us a sense of just how bad the situation is. Are wildlife disappearing? Will these animals that people go on safari to see? Will they be around in a generation? What's your view?
I mean, obviously, I'm making this book because I think there is hope. I wouldn't make a book just to show my pictures and say, look, it's doom and gloom. I am doing this book because I'm trying to raise awareness. I guess it's an idealistic way of doing it, but that's the only way I know how to. So I do a book because I think there is still hope and I think there is a way. And so I wanted to introduce also in the book the fact that there are little solutions happening and they are working, but they're not going to work for long in the statu quo of how the system is set up right now. What people don't fully understand is the system as it is now is a system that was introduced a long time ago when the colonials arrived. And it's what we refer as fortress conservation. So basically the colonials arrived and they came for sport hunting and they shot animals left, right, and center until they realized that if they don't actually do something about this, there won't be anything left. So that's when the national park started. And in the midst of doing that, they didn't factor in the hunter-gatherers that were there before them, and those very people became poachers, and we told them blankly that if they were coming to the national parks, they would be arrested or they would be shot on sight. So that's basically still pretty much how the system is set up today. So it's all about saving and preserving the parks, but without factoring what's happening around the park, and which is in essence a bit crazy because parks have always been designed in a way that they are smaller than the capacity of the animals that need to go and feed in the park. So typically what has happened is the animals always fed outside of the park. And today we're in a situation where humans have advanced so quickly that everything around the park now has been cut down. So if you look at a park, say from above, you will see that inside the park it's lush, it's green, it's beautiful, and just outside of the park it's basically a desert because all the trees have been cut down because people need to warm themselves up, people need to cook, and people need to build. And all of this is unmonitored, unchecked, and this is the situation we have today. So animals now are in direct conflict with humans because animals still need to go outside of the park to feed themselves. So if we are looking at Kenya, for instance, the beauty of Kenya is most of the parks are not. If you're looking at another country like South Africa, they decided that war was basically lost and they decided to fence it all So it's two different scenarios, but in essence, what we're talking about here is all the areas in Africa that are still not fenced, where animals depend on on the surrounding of the park to be able to feed themselves.
Yep, yep. The photo that is being shown right now, a line of these safari vehicles all lined up looking at animals. I went back to Kenya within the last 6 months, went on a safari and was in scenes exactly like this. And it got me thinking, am I actually helping the situation by paying to visit these lodges, paying the safari drivers? Am I helping the situation, or am I actually somehow hurting the situation? And I guess I wonder your view. Is tourism part of the problem, or is it part of the solution?
It's a difficult question because, obviously, when you look at a picture like this, you see that, there's no law and order and everybody is doing pretty much what they want. And by everybody, I mean the person who's driving the minibus or the four-wheel drive. They don't really care about where they are. They are looking at it as a job. And as soon as they see a lion, an elephant, or a leopard, they basically use their radio and they call everybody and everybody rushes to the same place.
Yeah.
And it's difficult, and I've been in the situations not that long ago, and you look at the guide slash driver and you say, why are you using a radio to call everybody? And it says it's the rule. And it infuriated me. I said, the rule of who, Why can we not just be here on our own and relish this moment on our own and look at the leopard and keep him, and leave him in peace, so to speak, even though we are there, as opposed to have this rush of minibus. So, most people obviously are thinking that, it's helping to be there, but I think the system in itself needs to be looked at and reformed. And the people who are drivers or guide need to think twice about their jobs in the way they do it.
Yeah, yeah. I did hear when I was last in Kenya that there were some lodges that were owned by big corporations. There were some that were owned by politicians, but it also seemed as though there were lodges that were portraying themselves as a part of the local community, Maasai-run lodges. You did have local people working in the lodges. So is there a way in which this tourism industry can actually support local people, or is it all is it so skewed that it really doesn't?
The system is such at the moment and has been for a very long time that, the safari business and the tourism industry, really profits only a few people. And the money trickles down, barely, basically, by, as you say, if for the lucky ones who are offered a job, to come and work in the lodge. And that's partly what's happening, is like the unmonitored dwellings that I was talking about around the national park or the reserves are there because people, come from very far hoping to get a job, right? So the most of the people who are employed in the jobs are actually not from the area. They come from different parts of the country, hoping to get a job. So in essence, to answer your question, no, I don't think the people on the ground actually do benefit from the money that the lodgers inside the reserve are making. And that's partly the problem, you see. Because then how can you tell community members from the area that they are benefiting from tourism when they are not? So that also needs to be looked into.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You make the point, I think very directly, that money is not the answer here. You don't think that this is a problem that we can write checks to solve. Yet it's a little bit hard to see an easy answer to these declining wildlife populations. Do you have a do you think do you remain optimistic, or do you think you have the answers, or are you just telling us that the current system is malfunctioning and wildlife is in danger?
Wildlife is in danger. There's no doubt about that. However, there are little solutions, local solutions that have been put in place by people who have idealistic ideas that Africa should remain with wildlife, and those solutions are working. But the problem is, so, for one area, you would have a solution. For another area, you would have another solutions, because different areas, basically are dealing with different, set of problems. The problem, so, typically people will ask me, say, so what is the solution? There's not one solution, there's multiple solutions. Some of them are at play, and so not everything is negative. The problem is the force of progress, to use the word progress, is so strong and so unmonitored, with no political will behind, that all those little solutions that are working now, if there is not an umbrella on top of it that basically put all those solutions together as a force to change, eventually what is working now will no longer work. So it's a matter of political will. And what I'm saying is that it doesn't change anything to carry on giving money right now in a system that's obviously hasn't worked, because that money has been flowing to those um, to these problematics for decades now, and here we are. So and there's nothing left except the national parks, in certain parts of Africa. So what is next? So do we carry on just the system that hasn't worked by just saying to people who do not understand what we are talking, who were not aware of what you and I are talking about now, and just carry on helping the system to do what it's doing? Or we put a pause, and we basically reevaluate the whole thing, and start thinking that maybe the time has come to actually talk to the local people, the community, or as I'd like to call them, the custodians of the land, who have been living there for very, very long time, who do understand what is going on the ground, and what are the possible solutions that will help for all of this to change. The problem is the international aid, to call it like that, whether it comes from Washington, Paris, London, or even Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, is so disconnected from the problematics on the ground that they are not really aware of how to change it, because they haven't been talking to the local people ever. Those people have always been, casted, maybe there's a better word than that, but they've always been kept out of the conversation. And I think the conversation needs to be started now. And I'll give a real example of what's happening today in Tanzania. The Tanzanian government is forcefully removing Maasais from the Serengeti ecosystem. And when I say forcefully, I'm polite. And telling them that they are doing this for conservation purposes. I mean, it's quite incredible to hear this when you know that the Serengeti ecosystem still exists and is still an incredible place today, partly because of the Maasai. And now we are removing the people who have, just by their pure presence on the ground, been part of why the Serengeti is still alive. And so why African governments are so disconnected themselves from what's happening on the ground? Probably imperialism, cultural ways of not understanding that the solution is within rather than coming from outside.
I want to encourage people who are following along to put questions in the chat. Guillaume, so many of your images, the one that we're showing right now, but so many of your images are showing development basically encroaching on wildlife habitats. That's one thing that you're documenting. And you've made the point that in Europe, in the United States, in other parts of the developed world, our wildlife is essentially now in zoos. We have paved over places where wildlife used to roam. Your argument is not that Africa ought to stay undeveloped, that development is a bad thing for Africa. I know your argument isn't that. How do you see that conflict between more and more urban sprawl and wildlife?
I mean, the problem is progress is associated to destruction. And what I'm trying to advocate is that there is surely another way. I mean, we are intelligent beings, and as you said very, very rightly, everybody is allowed development. But can we not find a way where, with more empathy and more respect, and in a position of listening to the people who know better than us, and for us to bring development, but in a different way? It's very simple. It's like urban planning. There's no urban planning at this point in Africa related to the issues that we're talking about. I'm not even talking about urban planning, in cities. I'm talking about urban planning as the cities are growing. But there's a total disconnect. So it's as if the problem didn't exist. So what I'm advocating is like, let's bring development to people, but in a different way than the way it has been right now. Because what's happening is basically progress advances very, very, very rapidly and destroys everything, in its wake.
We have a question here from Michelle Levick. And Michelle writes, I just spent time in Tanzania, returned on Sunday. I saw inspiring work in Grumeti that seemed sustainable and beneficial to all concerned. What are your thoughts, if any? Do you know that area? And what do you say to someone who has been been on a safari and has seen something that does seem to be working?
Yeah, I mean, all those lodges that we go to, and I haven't been to in this area for a very long time, so I'm not really sure what's happening at this moment that we're talking. But
Yeah.
everybody claims to be eco lodge, eco this, eco. It's and everybody is playing that game because that's the way you get tourists, right? So the only thing that I'm sharing here is a life experience of being in an area and in many countries on the continent. And I'm trying to bring that to light. What I've seen with my own eyes is the unmonitored dwellings that I was talking about earlier, that sometimes you have to go through them to go to another area to be able to enter a reserve or national park. And the people around me who don't have that sort of laser eyes that I have would actually enjoy those unmonitored dwellings, which I call them unmonitored dwellings, but they're actually shanty towns growing around national parks. But for an untrained eye coming from New York or Paris, they look very exotic, because they are, I suppose, But for me, they should not be there. It's as simple as that. So it's very hard to answer a question like this because I haven't been exactly where that person was, but I would know immediately if I was there if what this lodge or what this area is selling, so to speak, is working or not.
Yeah, yeah. And so others, feel free to send your questions in for Guillaume. Guillaume, you don't think that ivory poachers are the biggest, we're showing some images here that you've taken, are the biggest problem facing wildlife. Definitely a problem, but not the biggest problem. Explain why you make that assertion.
So of course, poaching is a problem. You have two sorts of poaching. You have ivory poaching and rhino poaching, and you have game meat poaching. So let's to answer your question about ivory poaching and rhino poaching, because it's the same thing really. What's happening with that is it comes in waves. There is crisis of poachers and poaching, and then it goes down because it goes, people get organized, and then it's handled in a way that the poaching goes down. Right now, there's no crisis of poaching. It doesn't mean that poaching doesn't exist and elephants are not being killed by poachers, but right now it's not a crisis. And I'll give you an example of how things have shifted. 10 years ago, in some areas, you would find 100 carcasses of elephants, and the ivory was gone. Today, in the same area, you would find 100 carcasses and sometimes more, where you will actually see that the ivory hasn't been removed. Mm-hmm. So the difference being that it's no longer poaching that we're talking about, it's human-wildlife conflict. So it's direct conflict for the same resources between humans and wildlife. And I'll explain more. Basically, when I was talking about the surrounding areas in national park or reserves, those areas used to belong to wildlife because there was nobody there, right? Those areas now are totally full with people. So the elephants, if you're an elephant or if you're a lion, so you go out, you chase a gazelle, and you end up basically being surrounded by human dwellings. And if you're a lion, you're gonna basically go. You're gonna go to a farm where you're gonna go and kill a goat. And if you're an elephant, you're going to go to another farm where, a gentleman or a family is growing, salads or lettuce or carrots, and you're going to trample that farm, sometimes kill family members. And basically what happens is people take it upon themselves to go and kill that animal. So that's where we are today. It's animals and humans are fighting for the same resources, and animals are now going back to the areas where they've always gone back, but it's no longer wild. It's full of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have
Oh,
another
and
question.
I'll just add one more thing.
Yeah, please.
Also related to poaching. It's an easier way to raise money. It's easier to raise money on the bad poachers that are killing wildlife in Africa. And that's kind of the preconceived ideas that everybody has when you start a conversation and you say, oh, I'm doing a book about conservation in Africa. And you say, oh my God, the poaching is terrible. And that's what the idea is, because a lot of the usual suspect basically come to America or the West and will raise tons of money on the fact that they will use that money to fight the poaching. And poaching is a problem, but it's a small problem if you put it in comparison with the wild landscape being taken over by people, and it's totally unmonitored.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have a question here from William Holstein, who writes, governments in the region don't have the greatest reputations. Are they doing the right thing? So why don't there's a lot of different governments here. You've traveled to a lot of countries. Are there countries that are better than others in handling wildlife? And is corruption a big part of the problem here?
Yeah, corruption is definitely a problem. I mean, so there's one way of dealing with this is to realize the disconnect between government and their own problems on the ground. Typically, what happens is you have international experts who come to Africa, go and see the government and say, we have tons of money and we are experts. So why don't we do it for you? And obviously, if you come to anybody, and including a government, and you say that to them, they'll say, "Yes, please take that problem out of our hands." And that's basically where the first disconnect happen. So, and that's where people on the ground don't have a voice, is because the people who are handling and managing the system are people who claim to be experts, but they're not even from there. So that's one thing. The second thing is, yes, corruption is a big problem, and obviously, in what I just described, it will fuel the corruption. Now, you and I have had this conversation before related to Rwanda, and Rwanda today, and I'm not talking about politics, and I'm not talking about the president, even though we all know that he's somebody who basically doesn't allow for independent voice to critique him. But as far as conservation is concerned, I will use that example because it's quite a simple way of handling conservation in a way that it works. So I'll just give an example of what Rwanda does at the moment has been doing for a very long time. And the main money and the main tourism revenue for Rwanda is gorillas. So they have a little hill with about 100 gorillas, and that generates millions and millions of dollars. And the way that the country speaks to its people about gorillas is every time there's a gorilla that's born, they celebrate it as a country. They talk about it on the radio, they talk about it on TV. They have special reports about it, and that has been going on for 20 plus years now. So there is a respect now from the population in Rwanda towards their gorilla population, and they love their gorillas because it brings them international limelight in the way that those gorillas are bringing not only revenues, but are making them proud of what the gorillas are have become the emblem of the country, so to speak, right? So it's that simple, you know, and it shows that basically there's a political will there, and everything that basically trickles down from that decision, which is a simple decision of talking to your population and reconnecting your population to the gorillas, therefore the wildlife, is tremendous, and it's going very well. And we are talking about a small country, so obviously this could be scaled up in all over Africa, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And then tell us a country where things are not working out as well.
Well, Tanzania is one of those countries. You know, Tanzania is a one-party system, and the way they control everything there is very difficult to access. So we have very little information on the way it's being done. But what I do know is, you know, 10 plus years ago, one prominent leader of Tanzania was retiring from politics, and before he was doing that, you know, we know that a lot of elephants were shot in the process, and we could only ask ourselves, you know, why is this happening? And obviously there was corruption involved, and we all think, and we can't really prove it, but the slaughter of elephants that were happening, that we couldn't really get a number on, but we could get some reports, you know, on the ground from people who were seeing things that they had never seen before, was directly related to the government.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you about the wildlife rangers. The Kenya Wildlife Service is one, but every country all across Africa has guards that are out trying to protect the wildlife. You actually did a portrait project. We're seeing a couple of the images there where you put, well, why don't you tell me what you were doing here? There's a number of these. They're rather striking images. What were you trying to accomplish with this portrait series?
So typically we hear about rangers when there is a news brief saying that a bunch of rangers were ambushed and killed, and it sort of becomes background noise, you know, and then it sort of disappears, and until the next time around, you know. And so I thought that I wanted to by taking frontal portraits like this, I wanted them to bring in the foreground, to show that they are real people who are actually doing that job, which is basically, you know, they're willing to pay the ultimate price in saving wildlife. And that was the beginning of what I wanted to achieve. And then I focused, you know, the first range of portraits that I did, I focused on private game reserves in Kenya, where it's a positive story, where private game reserves, you know, are basically investing a lot of money in protecting their wildlife, and the numbers are actually up. So it's not decline, it's going on the up. And I wanted to bring some positivity as well in this book, because there's a lot of positive things happening as well, but it needs reinforcement, so to speak, right? So I wanted to connect the work of those rangers in those private game reserves with the fact that they're doing such a good job, because they're well funded, they're well trained, they are respected, their family is being taken care of, and therefore corruption is being taken care of, and they take their work very passionately. And I thought it's kind of an homage to the work that these people are doing on the ground, which nobody really, you know, focuses on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, Kelly Millington just sent a question, and I'm going to read it. And others, if you have questions, now's the time. Kelly writes, how can I, as a US-based travel advisor who sells African safaris to high-end clients, who consider this a luxury bucket list experience, and we know there are people who dream of going to Africa their entire lives. How can Kelly act more responsibly? Clearly moved by the problems you're outlining. How can someone you know, send people on luxury trips but also feel good about themselves?
Yeah. I mean, you know, all of us are dealing with the same problem, basically. What is the truth? Okay.
Yeah.
How can we make sure that what we read and what we see or what we're being sold is the truth? And that's the problem today. So the only way to achieve a trip like this is to be able to make the proper research and really search it very well and engage with the right people who would, give the right advice. So that's more work, obviously, but it's worth it. And those organizations and those lodges and do exist, and but they are harder to find.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a good question, Kelly. And if others have questions, now's the time. Guillaume is I really want to thank you for joining us and from Athens, where it is 7 hours later. So you're doing incredibly well. Tell me a little bit about you and photography. How did you first become a photographer? And when I was working with you, you were covering all manner of stories, but a lot of conflicts, a lot of sort of tough stuff. How has your photography career evolved a little bit over time?
I mean, when you and I met, the journalism world was a very different one, and photojournalism was, let's say, in a better place. And journalists and photojournalists need money to go and do their work on the ground, to be able to spend enough time on the ground, to be able to come back with the good, so to speak, to prove that what they've seen does exist. The problem that we're facing today is that we don't have those revenues anymore to be able to do that job properly. And very, I mean, some people are still doing it, and they're lucky enough to have some organizations behind them, but those organizations are few now. So my work has become more documentary, in the sense that I focus on making books the way I just did this one. And so I spend my own time and my own dime, so to speak, to go deeper and spend more time on the ground, to be able to come up with a book like this, because you can't do a book like this in 2 years, right? So even me, I needed 20 years to be able to say the things that I'm saying now, to be able to be assertive about it, because I know what I've seen, and the book is the proof of that. So that's where my photography is now. If that answers your questions, Mark.
Yep. Is there a image in here that is your favorite one, or one that stays with you? Is there one you want to point to?
Yeah, I think the one that I really like is that lion that we saw earlier, which is still the Lion King, and he's surrounded, and he's sort of posing, and he's sitting on his four legs in the middle of this quarry, just outside of the Masai Mara Game Reserve, quarry that's being used by humans to come and get stones and sand to be able to build houses. And you have that lion there, somewhat still being the Lion King, which is equally sad, but equally gives me hope. And I think that picture is a kind of a good example of what this book is about. It's about the fragility of the beauty, and the beauty being the lion, and the strength of the lion is still there, but his world is being attacked, and we need to help it.
Yeah, yeah. A couple more questions are coming in, and William Holstein writes about how some governments, like Rwanda's, don't respect human rights. You made a reference to that. How can we expect them to care about animals? Talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that dichotomy here. And here's one thing: right across the border from Rwanda, we have Congo. We have Rwandan troops in Congo, and we have animals that are being killed in conflict right across the border. So how do you reconcile all of that?
Yeah, it's a paradox. It's so that hill where the gorillas are in Rwanda is shared by two other countries, by Congo and Uganda.
Mhm.
So depending on how things are going in these three countries, typically the gorillas who are really smart would go from one country to the next and go on the other hill, so to speak, right? So there was a point in time, 25 years ago, where the gorillas were not in Rwanda, they were actually in Congo because it was safer to be in Congo, right? I mean,
Yeah.
bizarrely, right? And then they would go to Uganda, and then the situation would change in Uganda, and then they would come back to Rwanda. But yeah, as I was saying, trying to make my point when you ask me where is wildlife doing well, well, Rwanda is a tiny country, and it's full of people, and and the only area that they've managed to, I mean, they've created national parks since. The problem is, by creating those national parks, they've removed forcefully people, right, to create this space because they wanted the space, probably because they were inspired by the money that they're making with the gorillas, thinking, well, we're going to create this space, we're going to bring rhinos from South Africa, which they did, and we're going to make more money there. So obviously that's not acceptable, right? Unless you give a good scenario, fallback scenario to the people that are being forcefully moved. But yeah, it's a paradox. So that hill, when you're on top of the hill surrounded by gorillas, which is, by the way, an humbling experience to realize that a gorilla is so close from us humans, you can hear down the hill the people who are just surrounding that hill. So, but that hill is a fortress now. It's protected by people with guns. So the gorillas are safe. And that's the only thing that I can say and talk about. If we are talking about politics and how Rwanda is behaving in the region or in their own country with their people, it's a different matter altogether. I am not here to say what they're doing is good. I'm just here talking about the gorillas.
Yeah, yeah. Bridget is writing here. I don't know if you can see it, a little bit about photography here. How do you feel about this tendency from documentary to artistic work used by photographers, even for photojournalism issues? So I guess a question about photographic style, and is this book photojournalism in your view, or is it something else? And what would you say about the style of your work?
I mean, partly what brought me on the journey of trying to do this book is because I was seeing, wildlife books typically only focus on the beautification of wildlife and exclude all the problematics around the beautification of it. So typically you will see an incredible picture of a lion and its muscles just about to grab the gazelle, and we have we have a lot of books like that, and I felt that what I wanted to achieve was something different, because we are so bombarded by pictures these days that it almost feels like the shock, the horror, having pictures that are horrible no longer shock. And so the raw graphic of horror will no longer shock and provoke an emotion in us that will make us wanting to react. And I think the beautification does the same thing. So it doesn't deal with the real issue. So I wanted to, as far as my photography is concerned for this book, it was a difficult tempo to find, where I wanted to be in reality, which is basically dealing with both, with horror and beauty, and try to mix both of them in the most, I mean, for lack of a better word, real way, but in the most, in a way that could describe the situation as it is without being too negative or too positive, but just the way it is, which is, again, the fragility of the beauty.
I think we're going to go with a final question, and Bridget is asking here, what do you think about how do you think new generations will care about wildlife? I'd like to expand that a little bit, because if you go on Instagram, and I know you're on Instagram, there are influencers who are going on safaris. There are people taking selfies of themselves with animals in the background. So,
Yeah.
sort of Instagram culture has reached the bush.
Yes.
And so talk a little bit about that. Is that a good thing, a horrible thing? And you have written about how uh, the camera phone has changed photography. So riff a little bit about that, the camera phone now out on Safari, and how has photography changed?
Well, photography has changed just by the example that you're using. It's like influencers are being paid by lodges or by companies in Africa who are bringing people who have 1 million followers and call themselves influencers and will use an iPhone and take selfies, and they call themselves a photographer as well. I mean, that's not my description of a photographer, but I come from a different generation. Photographers were, people who had a craft and used that craft, if you were going into journalism like I did, to be able to say things about a subject matter. It was in the service of a subject matter. What you're referring to is in the service of commerce, and that's what Instagram is today. Is a commercial digital shopping mall where you will follow people for whatever reasons, either because they look good, or because they sell a product that you're interested, or because they have an amazing filtered beautiful life, which by the way is not real because it's filtered, right? And that's how it has changed. It has commodified photography in a way that for people like me, it's harder and harder to be able to communicate with the language that we know, which is photography, about issues such as the one that I'm talking about in the book. So the question is a book enough now to be able to talk about human-wildlife conflict? I don't know. Maybe the book is the beginning of something else. Maybe the book will bring me in talking to you and making this, slightly more broad for people to understand what this issue is about. But this is how photography has changed. Is like, what is photography? It's a good question.
Yeah, great. Guillaume, on behalf of the Overseas Press Club, want to thank you for joining us. A provocative book, really provocative. I think you explained it well today. A pleasure to reconnect. And on behalf of I want to thank everyone for sending in questions and for joining us today. So, Guillaume, thank you very much.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Mark. Lovely to see you and reconnect and talk about all of this and the old days. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.